All righty. Well, good afternoon, everyone. For some, it's earlier in the afternoon. For some, it's later. Welcome, welcome to the Madison campus Sister Society. Today is June 24th. It's been quite a while since we last, I think, conversed with this specific panel. We did have our meeting about 2 months ago, and we're happy you're all joining us. My name is Lena Giacomopoulos, for any of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting. I'm the Program Director for Global Women's Leadership Network. And I'm here today with a couple of our co-leaders. And I'm going to let the co-leaders first introduce themselves before we get into our meeting. I'm going to provide a very short, quick update for what's happening for GWLN and the activities coming up in the next few weeks. And then I'm going to turn it over to this amazing panel that we had the pleasure of listening to and really touching a lot of our emotions and making us think a couple months back. And I'm very happy that the ladies are here again. So I will let Alex introduce herself too. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks so much, Lena, and thank you again for having us. I am one of the co-leaders for the Madison-based chapter here for GWLN.
Thank you. Meghna?
This is Meghna Kukreja. I co-lead with Alex on this amazing panel, and I work at CUNY Mutual Group as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We have two of our leaders who aren't on our call yet today. And I think they should be joining unless something's come up. We have Allison Carr also with Your Credit Union Partner. And also on our side, from the CUNA side, we have Marlo Folt as well. And of course, my team member, Olivia Carini, on the GWLN side here as well. Olivia, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. My name is Olivia.
All righty.
Administrative associate. So good to be here and excited to hear you guys discuss for the hour. So.
Thank you, Olivia. All right, I'm going to pull up just a quick PowerPoint. I know not everybody wants to see yet another PowerPoint, but just a quick update of what's happening in the next few weeks for GWLN and for those who may be joining us for the first time. So just bear with me here a second. All righty, so everyone should be seeing this. All righty. So what you're seeing here is Bridge the Gender Gap in our Bridge the Gap series this year. GWLN, which is an initiative under the Worldwide Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the World Council of Credit Unions, launched a series called Bridge the Gap. And the focus was on addressing the various gaps that exist in our credit union space. And the four primary areas that our Worldwide Foundation deals with is credit union development, the disaster relief work, the Women's Initiative, Global Women's, the Gender Gap, and our Young Professionals Program, YCUP. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of this during the next few weeks. It's been going on for the last few months, and we're focusing on bringing together as much as we can and learning more and helping women around the globe bridge the gender gap through the women in the credit union space. And here again, I'm just sharing a little bit from our co-leaders here. Like I said, Allison Carr, Marlo Folds, Meghna Kukreja, and Alex Shade, along with myself and Olivia. And I wanted just a second to focus on a little bit about the vision for GWLN when we were first established, about making that measurable difference. And what you see on the screen is a combination of some of our in-person meetings we used to have, and the pivot, obviously, to the virtual space that we've been having this last year and a half. We do have a couple of our sister societies that actually are meeting in person slowly in some parts of the world. They did not have the resources to meet virtually in their part of the world. So they're starting with very, very small teams. So hopefully this will pick up as well, but we do plan on continuing and seeing all of our sister societies, combination virtual and in person, in the coming months. Just to get a taste of where our sister societies have expanded to over the last year and a half, we're about at about 150 across 5 of the continents, and still going strong. We have a few more down the pike for launches in the US. Happening hopefully very, very soon. We had Dakota's launch last month, and the month before that we had Hawaii. And so hopefully Nebraska and Tennessee and Alabama are soon to come. And what you see here is where we have at least one sister society in the respective countries here, just FYI-ish. All right, a couple more numbers at a glance. Like we said, I said 5 continents, excuse me, 6 continents, about 150 sister societies. We have more than 4,500 women and men engaged from the 86 countries since our establishment. And the scholarships, because we recently awarded some scholarships the last few weeks, are about 70 scholarships to women that are coming from 25 countries. So continuing to move along. And coming up in the next few weeks, what we mentioned earlier, the big focus is going to be the World Credit Union Conference, which is our big annual conference at the World Council of Credit Unions. Every year we do host an in-person event. This year, obviously, it is virtual. You have a few more weeks to register, and I encourage you all to come join us. During the conference and through the Bridge the Gap series, GWLN will be hosting a couple of sessions. All of our sessions will be complimentary. Ours are on the 19th of July, but there are other sessions as well that you can attend for the young professionals on the 20th, and our foundation sessions that are also happening on the 15th. Go to the site, check them out. There may be something of interest for, hopefully for all of you. And I hope to see you there for sure. Coming in the fall, we're getting ready for our summit as well, which is happening virtually this October again. We had it last year too, virtually, and we've received very good comments about the event. And because we did open it up to our international audience, we were fortunate enough to be able to expand the reach. So I'm hoping to do that again this year. And like I said, World Credit Union Conference, there's a bunch of sessions, a bunch of breakouts. I definitely suggest you all go in and check it out. And the Bridge the Gap series, like I mentioned, the days, the 15th, the 19th, and the 20th. And again, these are complimentary to all of our audiences. So it's a great way for you to get to know us a little better, see what's going on with the programming, and connect with your fellow GWLN members, women and men across the globe. And again, thanking our major industry partners here. We have representation today from PSCU. We have CUNA Mutual Group as well. Co-op and Connect of our major champions. But there's many, many more. And we can't do what we do without the support of these organizations. And I want to say a large thank you once again, because of them, we are all here each and every day. And now I'm going to introduce these amazing ladies that are here. And I'm looking at these tremendous photos and these very, very amazing smiles, I must admit. We have 3 ladies that are joining us here, and the panel is going to be moderated by Alex Shade from CUNA Mutual Group, Jessica Cavazos, the president and CEO of the Latino Chamber of Commerce, Winnie Karanja from the CEO and founder of MAYDM, and Dr. Sagashus Levingston, the founder and CEO of Infamous Mothers, LLC. Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing. Here we go. And take it away.
All right, fantastic. And then one of the things I also want to just remind people before we dive in is if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. Olivia is going to be working with me to ensure that we do address those questions towards the end of the presentation. But if there's one that actually ties in with the questions that I have for our panelists, I will do my best to incorporate those in. We also do recognize that some of you have other time commitments. So first of all, thank you for joining us today. You have a choice when it comes to where you spend your time. So it's an honor and a privilege to see so many of you joining today. All right, so let's get started by first beginning with a check-in. Ladies, if you'll recall, the last time we met, we held space to discuss the various ways that racial disparities impact our communities. It was a disturbingly cold mid-December afternoon with the snow falling, at least outside my window, and us reflecting on the events of last year, George Floyd's murder, the civil unrest of 2020, the unemployment fluctuation, and the economy. It was a year like no other. Today, it's a very balmy, steamy, 75 to 80 degrees here where I come from, Madison. The sun is not shining. And we're also at the tail end of our workday this Thursday afternoon. But I think many of us have a very clear line of sight toward the weekend. So how are you doing and feeling emotionally, mentally, physically, etc.? Let me start with a check-in with Winnie.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everybody, for, first of all, inviting us back to have a second part of the conversation. I'm so honored to be able to speak with you all and just kind of share space. In terms of how am I feeling, it's odd because I can't remember back to that December date. It's like it's summer, so I don't want to think back to the winter. But I would say at this moment, I think I'm sitting in an expectation, right? I think there's this really interesting place of, I'm interested to see where things are going. Interested to see where things are going from just from like a world perspective in terms of, you know, what the next couple months hold. What does that look like for women returning or being in the workforce and a lot of the choices there? How, you know, I work with my program, work with a lot of students. So what this next school year looks like for them, how do we support them in terms of mental health? So I think I have a lot of questions at this moment. And that's where I would say I'm coming at, from a place of just like inquiry and curiosity and with so much hope for good, right? So that's generally, yeah, kind of how I am, but I'm here. And I'm here with a smile. So yeah.
I join you with being here with a smile. Jess, let me toss it over to you.
Well, you know, I'm exhausted. I think we're still like trying to figure out what, you know, what's next, right? COVID has like thrown so much at us. And then now the CARES Act and all these PPP and all these things that came at us and our members that we're still trying to figure out like where they're at, how we can help them, how we can, you know, create opportunity. You know, I do remember that cold winter day. And I remember like really feeling bleak, like, I don't know what's going to happen, you know, what's going to happen in 2 months, but I'm actually now optimistic. I do see a silver lining. I think that it's surprising to see when people come together, how wonderful things, you know, how everything conspires and we can build like these great programs. And for our chamber, and for me personally, I've after I told my story, and then after, you know, a lot of other panels, right, I have a lot of people saying, hey, I want to help and I understand, and how can we help build opportunity for your members? How can we help you build your dream around, like, you know, access to capital? And for me, that's a big, you know, that's a big win, right? You know, especially when I think there's been numerous calls and mentoring sessions with you, Alex, where, you know, it's been very, I know for me, it's been very like, you know, questions my leadership, whether I'm doing the right thing. Am I getting money to these, you know, businesses? Am I really here, you know, with a purpose? And sometimes you need to have that safe space where you can kind of connect with other people and know that they're also going through the same things you are, right? And so I'll just say that I'm optimistic. I think our economy is heading into an upward direction, but I think I also believe that we have to continue to help, you know, communities that have been the most impacted to just kind of level up to where everybody else is, right? And so we're only as strong as like the person next to us. So, you know, my whole thing is, you know, what can I do to help these, whether it's another woman, it's a person who's, you know, who can't make it out of COVID because, you know, that really financially, it just impacted so many of us. And there are people who can't make it, they don't know how to bounce back, right? And one thing that we're telling like people who come to the chamber who don't know how to bounce back, we're like recreate, you know, when it's broken, sometimes it's best to just create something new, and let's figure out what the future looks like. So that's where I'm at. And you know, today it's a sunny day here in DC, so I'm in a good place.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Jess. Yeah, I think between you and Andrea, the West Coast and the East Coast, if you want to push some more of that sunshine into the Midwest, that'd be fabulous as well. So, Sagashus, Dr. Sagashus, will you round us out with a check-in with where you're at right now?
So when I check in and see where I am, the words that come to mind is, I feel I have my second win. I feel resurrected. I feel optimistic, excited, and empowered. And I choose those words because I was at a very different place this time last year.
Right.
When, with the death of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I was in a process of launching an online conference, and the work that I do had gone from me having to convince people that this world that we live in online, with infamous mothers and the women that we serve, is a valid world, is worthy of attention. It's real even when it's virtual. And that was a fight that I had to make for a very long time. And by the time COVID come and the world was like, oh, that thing that you all do, show us how to do it, I was so exhausted because of the fight that I had to go through up until that point. And so since then, we've gotten, a lot of things have come together in some of the most positive ways, but there was a lot of trauma and a lot of healing that had to come with that whole process of trying to convince people in the first place. So this year has been about building, rebuilding, healing, resurrecting, and feeling empowered again. I remember that I was the person when Jay-Z said difficult takes a day, impossible takes a week. I was like, yeah, that's right. That was me. And then somewhere in this process, I was like, but is anything possible anymore? Difficult just feels beyond difficult. It just feels unachievable. And I had to remember with people like Alex and Winnie and Jessica in my life, no, Sagashus, it is what it was. Difficult is a day, impossible takes a week. You're a powerhouse. You're amazing. You got this. And I feel as if I'm standing back on my 2 feet. And I can say there would have been a time that as a woman, I would have been shrinking like, well, I'm okay and everything is, but but now that I know what it's like to lose that ground, I know what it's like I fight for it and I stand on it firmly by saying, no, today is a good day. Because I remember when there was a time when days were good and I downplayed it because I didn't want to seem as if I played small because that's what I thought I was supposed to do as a woman. That day is so past. It's like so over.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I just want to say thank you for your open and your honest share. For those of you who are in attendance, I think you have already gotten a preview into the amazingness that is our panelists. And I want to also go back a little bit in terms of the importance of why the GWLN and also Meghna and myself as the co-leads were so focused on bringing attention to this most important topic of racial disparities and its impact on communities back in December, was because we know and we were discussing and looking at and addressing those imbalances between the treatment of Black, Latinxers, and other economically disenfranchised racial and other ethnic groups. And we started to dive deep into the other myriad aspects of these racial disparities when it comes to looking at one's life, one's society, the society in which we all coexist in, whether it be in relationship to societal treatment or the income and the economic status, the housing, the health and the safety. We only had, I think it was like 55, 60 minutes, and we were just starting to scratch the surface. And before the time was officially up, there was a member participant who asked for a part 2. And so for us, it was most humbling, but all of us agreed during that first meeting that yes, we wanted to come back and we wanted to also create space and also tie it into, as you all heard Lena talk about, bridging the gender gap, addressing women's issue, and giving some attention and focus in this space. And so today's conversation is going to also hit and go deeper into those spaces of women and the gender gap, and also as we touch on communities and how you all can get involved. Before I transition into our first question, I would like to begin by sharing an original piece. I wrote it a few months ago, and it served as the opening to another panel discussion that I took part in, and it was entitled Valuing Diversity in the Workplace and Beyond, Centering the Black Experience. And my hope is that this serves as a grounding moment that can help guide all of us in today's conversation. So if you will give me the liberty to read it to you all, I would like, again, for this to sort of be your intentions as we all continue on in this space. So it's entitled, I Am Enough as I Am. I am enough as I am. My experiences are uniquely my own, but I know many can relate. Every moment of every second, I hear my ancestors whispering words of motivation and encouragement, reminding me that I am enough just as I am. Always remember, Alex, you matter and bring to this world things no one else can. For the weight of the world does not need to be carried by me alone or sit weighted on my shoulders. To show up, to represent, and to believe in myself should, can, and must be enough. But at times I recognize it is not. I know some people may not see everything that I possess and lovingly embrace. There may be some that judge before they truly see me. My clothes, my hair, my makeup, and anything else that adorns my body is a true embodiment and representation of me. There is an amazing realness when I sink deep into the wisdom of my elders and mentors who have prepared me for a world I must survive in while simultaneously dreaming of the world I wished I lived in. A world free from code switching, modifying behavior, changing my rhetoric, or needing to constantly adapt to fit someone else's norms. My hope is that people do see all of me and those who look like me. For the best discovery I have made is knowing that I am enough as I am and just as me. So back in December, ladies, we talked about the work your organizations were doing to address the barriers to financial stability and security, as well as the various ways you're working to empower young girls and women of color and reminding them to remember the value of their worth. Each of you in your own check-in spoke to that validation, that moments of inquiry and curiosity and hope that you are sitting in. We know that wealth development starts where the barriers begin. So let me start with Sagashus on this. Can you share how you are doing things differently? How are you, Dr. Sagashus Levingston, doing things differently?
So to be clear, when you're asking differently, give me a little bit more.
Yep. So each of the three of you are leading in a space where you're not just entrepreneurs, you're not just CEOs and founders. You all are setting and rewriting the rules when it comes to leadership.
Got it. Okay, so I want to start with this thing that Alex and I have between us, where she often compliments my hoop earrings. And I want to start with that because I was in a meeting yesterday, and this is totally relevant to the question. And the gentleman says, "Do you know the history of those earrings that you have on that's so beautiful?" And I said, "I don't know the history, but I know why I wear them." He says, "Well, the history is Black women and Latinx women were reclaiming their identities in the 60s and the 70s. And Black women in particular, with their big afros and their big earrings, were trying to assert their femininity, but also establish themselves in the world of feminism. And they were trying to assert their equality. And the earrings were about that bold reclamation. And I knew that I wore these earrings because as a reminder that when I'm in traditional spaces, a reminder of who I am and a reminder of reclaiming and owning and holding on to my identity. So I share that story because I think one of the ways in which I am leading differently, and the women that I have the privilege of, the women whose company I have the privilege of being in are leading differently, is we know that historically, the way that we live in a gendered society, and we know that men have been, our society has almost required men to lead in a way that was separate from emotions or even an awareness of emotion. There's this really clear separation between the personal and the professional. And I will even venture and say the human and the work, right? So labor is this commodified objective thing, and the laborer is kind of somehow seen as separate from it. And I think part what makes my leadership different and the women that I hang with leadership different is that we don't separate the human from the work. We see a direct relationship between the laborer and the labor. The way Alex started this session today with a humanities piece is an example of that. And I think this idea of recognizing, for me in particular, that there is an artificial divide for women in particular between work and home at all times. So in a more traditional, mainstream, patriarchal society, ideally the way that we understand things, or less ideally, is men are in charge of the work sphere and the economic sphere, and women are in charge of home. So men often don't have to really think about what's happening at home because they have a woman there to take care of that. In my world, that's not the case. I am the economic provider as well as the hearth. I am the center of this particular household. So at all times, I am thinking about what's happening professionally, and I'm also thinking about what's happening personally. And my leadership model takes that into account, as well as my personal model takes that into account. And I've learned that there's a lot of power in that, because when I am encountering my peers, I'm able to see them as a person and not just as a producer of labor, because I have to always think about my humanity as well as the humanity of the people around me within my household. And so I think there is I don't want to say that there is we add humanity to the process, but we are often aware of the humans engaged in the process.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sagashus, because you're touching on the points in that space of of you defining for you, what does it mean to lead and to do so authentically. And so let me turn it over to Jess. For you, what does that mean? I mean, you and I, Jess, we've talked about, and you even mentioned it at the start in your check-in, around asking people to recreate. And for you, it is so important that Latinxers and other women of color are focused on building wealth. So how are you doing things differently? What does leadership mean to you in this space?
And I want to say I loved the analogy that Dr. Sagashus gave, because the balance is real, right? Like, finding the balance between motherhood and being what people expect that a leader should be, and then going in there and showing up in a male-dominated space, right? Economic development, and what the archetypes have developed as far as what you should be and how you should act. And, so I'm right there with the hoops, I wore leaves today, but, I'm right there with the hoops. But I'll tell you that I don't cookie cut anybody, right? So I don't, I think we're all authentic, all dynamic in our own way. And when we're working with business and Latino business, Latinx businesses, they all have their own magic, right? So if we're trying to develop like a program, we try to make it malleable so it's malleable to everybody's needs, but then on an individual basis, we meet with people and we're like, what is your dream? And how can we as a chamber, as an organization, get you there? And it might not be the same roadmap that we gave Mr. Sanchez down the street or Mrs. Garcia, but we want to make sure that the roadmap that we're setting for you is customized for where you are right now. So a lot of that, when they're talking, like right now, I just finished a meeting, and one of the main discussions around promoting economic development within Latino businesses was procurement. And I was just like, well, I may be on a whole, and my idea of procurement is wonderful if it worked at the grassroots level of where the people that I'm dealing with, right, who sometimes don't understand procurement in the same way that the C-suite is talking about it, right? They're saying this is a great opportunity for businesses, but a lot of what I'm dealing with on a daily basis is the operational. Like our small businesses don't understand how that they have to level up on their operations in order to move to the next level, right? And the next level is procurement, let's say. And a lot of our Latino businesses stay in the startup phase for 20 years. They're doing the same thing. They're making, they're making money, so they're happy. But, my whole thing right now is that advocacy piece. And I think where our group really, where we see eye to eye is because we're all advocates. And we all want to, one of the biggest things is mobility. How do you create mobility within communities that not only are divested in, but who continue to have to become something or work harder than everyone else to just get that piece of the pie. And I'll tell you the reason, like, for example, right now with the CARES Act, I've had to write all these proposals and I feel like they're asking me to put so much skin in the game. And I'm like, I got 3 staff. You want me to do so much with so little? And I'll be honest, if it wasn't because the CUNY Mutual Group gave us an endowment, that was how we got in the game. Because before that, we weren't able to get into the game without that investment, right? So now they're like, okay, you got some money. We're going to give you 50 grand and you're going to and see how you can help your community, right? So let's do a match. And you find 3 more matches. And so they not only do they put all these, it's not like the money is like, here's the money. We trust that you are going to invest in your community and you know what's best for it. It's hard. So, I kind of go in there and I tell the story, and I'm always trying to tell that story of how we're helping and how we're customizing and the American dream. And I, depending who it is, I have to kind of tell the story from their lens, right? That optics that they want me to tell it, or the way that they can process it. But it is really, this leadership role, I always feel it has to be fluid. Like I have to kind of go in to whatever meeting and I have to understand who I'm meeting with and what their vision is and how I can, highlight the platform or our businesses in that light, right? And it's just it's very difficult to say these are the goals I have. My year-end goals are let's say to get the chamber to make at least $500,000, right? And we're always at a deficit. So, I'll tell you that I think that being creative is about reinvention. It's about, creating a lot resources with very little. And also, listening to or having a pulse on who's out there and what their needs are and really not trying to create just one model for all, being malleable. So I don't know if that answered your question, but, I think, leadership can be, pretty much, a hard thing, especially when you have a big heart, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when I think about, and I'm gonna turn it over to Winnie to add on to this, Winnie, you had shared that you were optimistic, that you are curious, And what's very much top of mind, and I think this even goes beyond and prior to having to lead young girls and women that are students, you have always kept their mental health top of mind, in addition to your staff. And so I have seen some of the things that you have been doing differently, and you also continue to have an eye on that economic piece. And I'm going to say that from the space of how you are also keeping salaries top of mind for these young girls and women when you're talking about being in this, again, traditionally male dominated industry of tech and within the STEAM fields. Can you share with us, how are you doing things differently? And for you, what does it mean to be an authentic leader?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that's a very multifaceted answer and response for me. When I first started in the tech field and started MAYDM, I mean, the majority of the tech field is white and male. And when I started the organization, I kind of needed to bring different types of leadership skills, right? Ones that were more like acceptable to the table. And it's been interesting because this past year, you know, with COVID, and then I want to say it was like May, where I just needed to be vulnerable, right? I learned the power of leading with vulnerability, and leading my team. So my team's a diverse team. And before then, you know, I'm a Black woman. I have the intersection of being Kenyan American, immigrant. I always, in many ways, kind of like shielded some of the experiences that I've had from my team. But this past year, I really, when things happened, right, when the murder of George Floyd, you know, Breonna Taylor, the death, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, everything happened this summer. I just broke down. I decided I'm going to remove this barrier that somehow has been said needs to be there, to have the conversation with my team and with, you know, partners that we work with and others just around this reality, right? And the reality of being a Black woman, and the reality that our BIPOC students face. And so in one way, I would say that's something that this past year has really put top, you know, at the forefront in terms of my leadership. And as I think about this, you know, I've always you know, focused on a lot of the work that we're doing with our girls and with our BIPOC students. And last summer, we really had an even stronger focus on mental health. And one thing, you know, in thinking about my curiosity this coming summer and what excites me, and when I think about leadership, the first thing that came to mind, Alex, was you all are getting a little bit of a sneak preview, but right now we have a program with our students called STEM Powers Girl Power, and it's for all female identifying students. And it just started on Monday, and the girls, so it's 3 weeks, this week, next week, and the third week. And so in the third week, the girls are going to, there's a mirror they have, and they're going to program this mirror. They have a piece of hardware called a Raspberry Pi, and they're going to program so that code appears on the mirror. And the code's going to have the date and time, but then they're going to be able to write a message on there. And the message that we put at the front for the students, where they'll see the example before they code their own, is "You are worthy." So imagine coming up to a mirror, and there's also going to be AI facial recognition, right? Because we're teaching students all the things, and for them to look at themselves and have a message come up, whether they've, you know, coded themselves to say "you're worthy" or hashtag Black Girl Magic, or just positive reinforcement. And to look at themselves as girls who have braids, extensions, hoops, curly hair, pink hair, all of those different things. And to be like, I just programmed a mirror to like write, you know, on this code, like it's a digital mirror, but that power of that. And to me, like that is what's so important in the way that I think about how do I lead now, is by changing that narrative of who belongs in tech, and not from like a yes, from like a high level place, but for the individual girls who are just gonna like program this and be like, yeah, I did this, and they're gonna have, you know, their selfie and like, here they are, they coded this message to come across. And I think the power of that, you know, I think about that experience for our middle school students, and then the work that we're doing with our internships. So all the students who are in our program, when they come into high school, they can do a summer immersive program, and then where they learn a technical skill set, so cybersecurity, JavaScript, you know, coding, product management, and then we're placing them in paid internships the following summer. And so this summer we have 13 students who are in internships, and over the 7 weeks, they will be, you know, working hands-on at different companies in the area, and all of those students are getting paid $13.50 an hour. And so aggregate, those 13 students pre-tax are going to, you know, earn about 36 to 40,000. And if those students weren't in the internship, they'd be earning about 14,000 aggregate. But the interesting thing about that is it's not just about, yes, it's about the pay, but the other part of it is the being in the environment, right? Getting this technical skill set and the work that, for me, in order for this internship to be something that we say that I implemented, it required our companies to be on board, but for them to commit to walking through a justice course with us. What does justice in the workplace look like? How do you create an environment for youth talent to thrive? And so all of these companies committed to that. And for me, that was the vulnerability of saying like, okay, like you might say no, but like the interesting thing is like, I was like, I can't put my students in a space where they're not, you know, where I'm not working to ensure that there's an environment for their dignity to thrive, for them to be respected, for them to just flourish, and to work on the things that we don't talk about, right? And to identify like, oh, there might need to be some work. And all the companies who somehow, you know, we came into conversation about this because this isn't something that like is even, we've expanded. It was just a small pilot. They all said yes. And so the power of this is that these 13 students, without even stepping foot at any technical college, once they turn 18, the companies are like, our starting salary that students can get is about 38,000. Most of those, and they're like, within a year, the student, without again a technical degree, any type of degree, can be at a 50, you know, 45, 50, 50,000 a year salary. And so that for me has been the way in which I've seen my leadership has been a place where I said, how do I care for our students well? How do I create that environment well? But then also, how do I risk the moment of somebody saying no in order to ensure that, like, because again, hearing somebody say no to something that you've created is a little bit challenging, but to realize that like, that means that they might not be the right fit, and that's okay. But I have learned through this past year of process and through this that like caring for students, caring for people, especially in the world that I work in with tech, is so much beyond the technical skills. And so that's kind of how my leadership has, I would say, has changed and evolved in the past year.
Wow, Winnie, I don't know if you have eyes on the chat, but I want to just share a couple of the comments that just came in, because I think you need to hear this as well as the rest of the people who are on the call. So Love MAYDM, my high schooler is looking to join the program next summer. So excited for her to have this experience. What a life-changing experience for young students to go through. Winnie, this is really incredible. And one of the things that I had also put in the chat was that not only are they starting to build their own wealth, but when I think about the opportunities and the access that you are now providing, and also collectively working, not just with the team at MAYDM, but also then with those companies, that is the power of community. That is collaboration. That is thinking outside of the box. This is how we can start to get to some of those systems level change, by also having those companies look inwards and go, hey, you know what? Let's bring a group of high school students in that space. And so thank you for being creative, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Because I had shared last year, the organization MAYDM turned 5 years old last year. So if you don't know it, Google it. I know Lena or Olivia might put it up in the chat as well. So thank you. So you all touched on a couple of things in this space related to leadership, advocacy, empowerment. And those are great, but I'm going to flip the coin. On the opposite side, we know that being a leader can be challenging. It can be frustrating. It's not always easy. And so when I think about leadership and how you all are doing it different, then taking in all the statistics that Winnie was sharing, and being a woman of color, and again, somebody who identifies as that, and then the wealth gap, we know that the research shows that women are still significantly underrepresented in management positions across all industries. Even with the doubling of women CEOs at Fortune 500 companies in the last 2 years, it's still only at 7% of leaders. So let me start with Jessica here first. Can you speak to the importance and significance as to why you are fighting for equity and inclusion, and how you are creating a system that allows us to be seen?
I do believe that it takes, you know, how would I say? I always feel like I'm going at it from the daughter of an immigrant, the daughter of a small business owner who did all he could with the little he had, and when you're looking at it from that, like, I always want to put myself in the shoes of my parents, and how would I help somebody who, I saw them struggle so much, and how can I help somebody in their shoes now, right? Using maybe just this position that I have. Sometimes it's that little title that gets you in the door somewhere, right? How do you use that to make the charge of I always say economic equity, right? Or change, or opening the door. And I've been very fortunate, very blessed to have had people open the door for me. And, I feel like now it's time to pay it forward in the best way I can. And sometimes it's going against, some of those people who opened the door for me at that time, right? Because times are changing, and people, not everything stays the same. Not everything's the same from 20 years ago to where we are right now. And so how do we empower people now, where they're at, how they're at, using simple tools of when you talk about equity, I mean, how do you create equity if that person, and again, doesn't understand, how to balance their checkbook, or how do you start there? How do you start what you said at the obstacle, right? How do we start at the obstacle? And for me, it's been really important to help, create understanding, connection, open doors through education. The chamber served about 1,400 people last year during COVID. We became really resourceful because we used unemployed teachers at the time to do health checks, or what we call community health checks on our businesses. With the 3-man staff, we didn't have enough resources to help everybody. We were open till midnight. There would be calls coming in at midnight from business owners that say, "This is my livelihood. I'm losing everything. What do I do?" And so, the beautiful thing, again, when community gets invested and involved, then there's this impact that can happen. And, we had, I think they saw how, one of our board members, he saw how exhausted we were. He's like, "Let me help you out with a couple teachers." The teachers came in and they just kind of did the triage. They wrote really great notes for us. And then we could kind of decipher which ones were the more important business calls. Some of it had to do with mental health. So we had to get, our help from our community members who did It was called the Latino Consortium, which they do one-on-one mental health counseling for business owners that didn't understand what, they were going through so many other things, losing their homes, losing their businesses, having to move their children because now they don't live in that school district. What do and even though it's all virtual, they were like, now I live in Oregon. Can they still go on virtually? These are questions that as a chamber, we're not used to answering. So we became the triage call center for everyone in Wisconsin. And we tried to help them navigate and pivot. And so day 2 of the closures, the chamber did we did a call to all our members and anyone who was interested on how to access Zoom. What is Zoom? How do you, and this is something that was real. Like people didn't know what Zoom was. They're like, I'm busy working in my business. I'm hands-on, I'm there making your lawn look great, or I'm there, at the beauty shop. This is not something that that I'm used to. I don't know how to do business online. And so, we had a couple people who did business online prior, and they just gave that workshop. And then we did one-on-ones, and these teachers helped these young businesses on accessing Zoom. And so that was the first start. So education, accessibility, community, the reinvention of our chamber, going from, Latinos are really we like to hug people, social distancing was really hard. It's like, oh, I can't hug you, I can't touch you, I can't even smell you, all that, right? And so a lot of our businesses had to pivot, and they pivoted in a different way. But I'll tell you that something that I love about, and I'll just, as a Latina, about the Latino community is this resiliency, that resiliency to okay, now I know I've lost a lot, but how do I keep helping my community? How do I keep mobilizing my neighbor, helping my neighbor? And that was really important. So, I was in a meeting with the city of Madison, and one of the interesting maps that I saw is it was this map about the most, let's say the most challenged communities, the poorest communities in Madison, and how it aligned with, it was transportation trends on who was still going to work during COVID, right? And so if you align both maps on who was going to work and where the poverty was, you aligned them, it was it looked like it was the same map, right? And so, that just, when we're looking at the economy, I want people to think about that, but how these people were really invested in our economy when we had the option of just staying home, right? A lot of us had the option of and they didn't, but they continue to go to work. They help, stabilize our economy. Our cleaning companies were decimated during COVID. So they had to figure out how to do something else. And again, recreation, reinvention. And so my desire is that we again look at those individuals as very those frontline workers as very important to our economy, and that we value them and give them opportunity and create pipelines. And that I feel like this, in my role, that's my job, to tell that story, to continue to tell the story about the successful businesses that pivot. How do you pivot? And why, again, like I said, the teachers, I'll tell you, they were the teachers from Lighthouse School. They were so important to how we figured out how to serve our community at that time. Because 1,400 calls is not easy. It's, again, our chamber had to figure it out. We have an 800 number. I haven't heard it, ring since, things got better. Now, they just call the regular line, but it was, I remember getting a call from a mom, a mother who, she had to close down her little restaurant, right? And she called at 9:30, and I answered the call. And, she was just behind financially. She was behind, in every realm. And now when I talked to her, so she had to get a job at McDonald's. But when I talked to her last month, now she reinvented her, now she has another food, based business and she's, delivering like, what is it, gluten-free foods that she makes, she just reinvented herself, and I love her new business. So, I'm hoping that we had a little part in that, but I think that's, that inspiration to give others the self-belief that they can do it, and that they have a support system is really important for them to be able to make it, right? And so I think that's, has been the hardest part for me, is to kind of figure out how to help my community just continue to survive, succeed, sustain, and elevate, right?
Wow. I mean, just when you were speaking, all I kept thinking was, yes, all of us have a role to play when it comes to changing the narrative and focusing on fixing the system, that reinvention, that reimagining. And it's a system that has suppressed economic opportunity at all levels, regardless of whether it be at the individual level, the family level, the organizational level, even from a geographical perspective. And so I'd like to turn it back over to Sagashus. So in this space of, again, you fighting for equity and inclusion, why is this so important to you, especially as you are also looking at rewriting the rules and role modeling in a very different way? And similar to Winnie, you are in that tech, entrepreneurial, male-dominated space. I'm curious, what do you have to share?
So I think the first time I was aware, I became aware of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, so let me just say, growing up and going to a boarding school in Lake Forest, Illinois, I was aware about what it means to be one of a handful of people of color in a predominantly white space, or what does it mean to be someone coming from a working class background and in a very affluent environment. So I was aware of those things, but I don't think I understood what diversity, equity, and inclusion meant until until I went to college. And this example that I want to share, it's coming from my literature background, but is directly connected to where I am today. I remember being in an English class, and it was a survey of American literature. And on that syllabus, and the focus, there was a heavy focus on writing that was happening during times of slavery, but also after slavery. But the only African-American person on that syllabus, now keep in mind, this is a survey of American lit. So this is a broad study of all American, all canonical text. The only person that was on that list was Frederick Douglass. Now, the reason why that was impactful, no one else, I don't think, thought about this, but in my mind, I'm thinking, so the only person that wrote during this time period was Frederick Douglass, only Black person that wrote. And it wasn't until I became a senior, because remember, I am a student, I'm not a teacher just yet. It wasn't until I became a senior that I found out more people wrote, but it was time to graduate then. And so that made me pursue a master's in African-American lit, because at that time my degree had been in American lit. I needed to study African-American lit because I couldn't exist in this society as a Black woman without having a broader understanding of what Black people have contributed to American culture. And it wasn't until grad school that I was introduced to the world of James Baldwin. I learned about Richard Wright. I learned more about Gwendolyn Brooks. But how had I become a grown woman? And I can't cuss in this environment, but I want to say a grown something woman. And I didn't know about the contributions that Black people made to the society. And that was particularly important because I was a Black person. How do you move through this world and not feel as if you're a part of something, or you always feel as if you're an outsider? And so that bothered me. The other piece that I want to connect that to kind of a discovery that I made as far as business was concerned. So when I started wearing my hair natural, it was 21 years ago, and I remember because it was a month after my daughter was born. There wasn't a lot of hair products for my natural hair. There wasn't. You can go inside of the beauty supply now. You can see 4C. This product is specifically for 4C hair. You can see products specifically for curly and coily hair, right? That wasn't existing during my time of transitioning into wearing my hair from wearing it chemically treated to wearing it natural. And so what that told me, in the same way the literature piece told me, was somehow I was invisible. Now, mind you, keep in mind, this is not like the Band-Aid situation. This is like, I need this. This is my hair. Like I have to do something with this. But I had nothing where there was no sense of, I felt like I didn't exist. And I felt like I didn't fit within these particular parameters. And so that automatically made me think subconsciously that something was wrong with me, right? I didn't know at the time to think that it was the people who was creating the solutions and the people who had the capital to create products, that they were creating products that was a reflection of them and their environment, their community. As I've grown older, I realized though, a lot of what we see on the shelf, a lot of what we see in terms of products and services are a reflection of a couple of things. They're a reflection of the people who have the power or who have been allowed to walk through the gates to create certain solutions. So it's not a reflection of the idea of the actual solutions that exist in the world. It's the people who's able to mass produce solutions, which is a reflection of relationships with economic institutions, which is a reflection of relationship with universities, which is a reflection of so many things, but it's not a reflection of the idea of whether or not a solution exists. It's just whether or not this solution has made it to the market yet. It's also a reflection of who gets the keys to certain things and who are denied those keys. And so when I think about business and I think about wealth and I think about economics, I'm often thinking about what solutions is the world denied if these things never make it to market, if we do not diversify the voice and the possibilities that are able to be created. I'm often thinking about one thing that we're working on, and I'm trying to, how do I say this without letting the cat completely out the bag? But so we're launching a podcast and we're asking the most outlandish question for this whole pilot season of this podcast. And that question is, are the women that we call infamous mothers, and these are the women who we've identified as people who challenge the status quo in their mothering, they are people who mother outside of respectability politics, is it possible for the women that we call infamous mothers to become millionaires? Now, on the one hand, capitalists will say, especially capitalists who don't believe in these folks having access to capital, why are you the idea of these, so you're trying to promote millionaires, but that's really not what this piece is, what the work of this podcast is. It's the idea that the women that we call infamous mothers are the outsiders, the rebels, the ones that people often associate with welfare, food stamps. They associate them with a certain kind of struggle. But if I were to ask you, do you see this single mom with 6 kids? So let's say me, single mom, 6 kids, 4 different dads, or this one who's a recovering addict, or this one who's recently divorced. Do you think she has the capability of becoming a millionaire? That's a real question that you have to answer for yourself. And in answering that question, forget all the conversation about capitalism in the sense of we all, the argument that we often make to kind of justify certain things is in this particular society, the capitalist society that we live in, does this woman, can she become a millionaire? And then often what we're answering is, do she have a right to become a millionaire? Without even realizing that that's what we're answering in our head. Who is she? I'm not a millionaire, so why does she get to be a millionaire? But here's the reason why that's an important question. If somebody is brave enough and courageous enough to say yes, then now the question that you have to ask yourself is, how do we do this? What strategies do we put in place? where this woman can go from here to here. And why is that particularly important? It's important because once you get past all of she has to pull herself up by the bootstraps thing. Now you have to ask yourself about the systems that are in place. We have a trust gap with economic institutions. You have to ask yourself, why is it only 2% of millionaires are women? And then you have to ask yourself, what women, who are the 2%, right? And why is it that the number's already so low, but why is it that how much of that number is represented, are these women included in that representation, right? And so this outlandish question that we're asking is more so about challenging, is more of a, what do you call it, a thought experiment for our society, for our listeners, for, it's more of a thought experiment for the women themselves. Even if the goal is not necessarily to become a millionaire, the question that we're asking really is, how do these women attain economic freedom? Right? And how do they gain wealth when they have historically been associated with extreme poverty? I will say this final 2 points. There's a book called a book by Dr. Venus Opal Reese, and it's called, I think, The Black Woman Millionaire, the Hot Mess Edition. And when she wrote her book, she said traditional publishers turned her down because they said there's no market for this concept of Black women as millionaires. There's no market for it. Everybody else is writing about wealth, but there's no market because Black women clearly don't want to be economically stable, is the message, right? And so what she said is right alongside with Audre Lorde, when Audre Lorde says self-preservation is one of the most radical acts that a Black woman can create. I think this idea of what does it mean to become a Black woman millionaire is one of the most radical ideas that one can pursue, because it's the idea that it's something that it's the most revolutionary idea that we can pursue, because it's the thing that we often disassociate Black women from. We associate Black women with service, volunteer work. We associate them with being the mules of the earth, but we don't associate them with wealth. And so for me, this idea about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the work that we do around it, especially in the economic sphere, is crucial, because I have learned firsthand what happens when barriers are created for solutions, basic solutions to, like, how do I wash my hair? I've seen firsthand what happens when those voices and those products and services are not there.
Well, that was quite the mic drop. Sagashus, I mean, you touched on so much, especially in that space of asking, again, going back to language, going back to rethinking of how do these women attain economic freedom? How do Black women attain economic freedom? For years, we know that Black women have been creating businesses at such a far rapid pace beyond any other racial ethnic groups. And so when COVID hit last year, unfortunately, we saw that without that lack of access to additional capital or additional funding sources, they took out a certain percentage, and I apologize to everybody on the call, but I don't have that percentage in front of us, but they took out a whole slew of businesses. We heard Jessica talking about that in that space of those that had cleaning companies. And when we look at, again, how we can be redefining in this age of Aquarius, what this new world could look like and the possibilities of that, you're right. It's okay that you dropped a couple of crumbs talking about what's coming from infamous mothers, but it is about looking at who is the she, what does she need, but you gotta first ask her before you presuppose that you know. So thank you for sharing as much as you did with us in that space of also your own journey and also the connecting of the dots. Winnie, I saw your head moving. north south. I saw it like the body movements of the yes, yes, yes. What do you want to add on, or how would you like to also use this time to share your voice in the space of why it is so important for you that you continue this fight in this space of equity and inclusion, and how I mean, you already mentioned how you're creating a system of financial empowerment and reminding our young girls and those that identify as females that you have a place in this space, and you know you need to ask for the money.
Yeah. Wow. I only have just a few things to share, but let me say, Dr. Sagashus, wow, that was like a sermon and a half. Let me tell you, I'm just like, where can I pass the collection plate? Like, what can we do? Can I think it would be amazing if once the podcast comes out, Dr. Sagashus, for you to share it with us. Like, I think you just challenged us in so many different ways. I think what I can only add to what was shared, well, so there's two parts. One is, I think that's just like a question I'm going to be sitting with, like the main focus of the theme of your podcast. I will share it across all my platforms when I can, once it's out. But like, I think for all of us to sit with that, that's just so powerful. So thank you. I can't even believe that I get to be in this space with you. This is just amazing. So for me, and the work that we're doing, and just having our students fighting for equity and having our students be seen, one of the biggest things is Goldman Sachs came out with a report, and this report said that one of the fastest ways, it just came out March 2021, so just a few months ago, yes, because we're in 2021, and it said one of the fastest ways to accelerate change and effectively begin to address the racial wealth gap is to listen and invest in Black women. And I think about touching on some of the things that like Dr. Sagashus has talked about, some of the things that Jessica has talked about around business and entrepreneurship. And I think about tech and high tech solutions, right? And our focus really on the STEM fields is because the STEM fields are supposed to be a way to be like the great equalizer. And, some people have stated it in that way, right? To be able to level the playing field. And that hasn't been true, right? Because not everybody has access. And it's so interesting because when I think back to, for example, this internship program, and the reason that I'm just so passionate about it is because when you think about the salary that our students are earning, $13.50 an hour, if that's a yearly salary, that takes you to what is the average salary of somebody who's African American in Wisconsin, right? But then you think about the earning potential of these students, 38 to 40,000 without even stepping foot at a technical college, and you think about all the growing number of opportunities in STEM. And the reason that I really want to ensure that students of color, BIPOC students, Black women are seen in the STEM fields is, I think not many of us know that, for example, the software that's behind, GPS and Google Maps was like first invented by a Black woman. Like that's the coding, the infrastructure for that came from a Black woman, Dr. Gladys West. Not many people know that the first invention for a home security system was invented by a Black woman in Queens. And I think to change the narrative, which is so important, it's something that's very, very important to me. And in our programs, it's all about centering BIPOC inventors, BIPOC individuals in the STEM fields, but also, BIPOC women, right? So that students can see that they're not the first ones to show up. Because when you ask a question like, picture an engineer, picture a computer scientist, often our minds, unless we do some work to disrupt it, go to picturing somebody who looks like Mark Zuckerberg, right? And that's why it's so important for our students to be seen. That's why this, I'm so excited. Again, it's a small project, but like this mirror activity with our students, because they're like, I did this, and I'm seeing a reflection of myself and what I coded to share this, to say you're amazing, to say this amazing message, right? And this personalized message, right? And to have that AI facial recognition, like that is an experience that students have that they can document, that can't be taken away. And so us doing the work for them to see that there are other pioneers, BIPOC pioneers in the space, but for them to see themselves, right, and capture that digital moment, for me is so important. So that's all I can really add to this. But just, I think such a big focus around narrative, narrative changes, and yeah.
It's not just what you're adding, Winnie. The things that they're pearls of wisdom that you're also adding as well. And you're right, it does go back to the narrative. It also goes back to something I ask my daughter to do oftentimes, is to close her eyes and to just imagine. I I I challenge the team I'm on and the people that I lead to close their eyes and to reimagine. And when I think about each of you as entrepreneurs and having that entrepreneurial spirit at the core, you're also visionary leaders who are constantly reimagining a more just, inclusive, and equitable future and world, not just for right now, present day, but for our future's future. So that in and of itself, that is a lot. So I'm curious to know, who do you look to as you put your own work into practice? I'm going to start with Winnie. Winnie, you already mentioned several amazing leaders, several amazing pioneers like Dr. Gladys West, but who do you go to? Who's your inspiration as you're designing and redesigning and imagining?
That's a question. Wow. I would say as I'm designing and redesigning, I don't know if there's necessarily one person who comes to mind. I think for me, it has always been for me looking around and seeing those who are unseen and knowing that they need to be seen. And seeing those who are unseen and seeing their strength, their magic, their creativity to make things happen. Like I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by, by Jessica, by Dr. Sagashus, by you, Alex, like by folks who are willing to look at things differently, willing to be innovative in approach. And I guess, yeah, I've always been, so a little bit of my own story is, so I'm Kenyan, and, in Kenya, generally has it's a great place. And it's interesting because there's a lot of gender dynamics. And so when my family moved to the US, I was always really great with kids and, love kids. And I always felt pressured to be, not even pressured. I just that's what I just slid into. Cause I was like, kids are great and they like me. They don't cry when I hold them, which is great. But it was really interesting because when I went to college, I wanted to do work in international development and do work in the conflict and peace, space, right? And a lot of my studying was in areas that had a lot of conflict, and specifically I studied gender-based violence. And so it was very different from what you would expect a Kenyan woman to be studying and to be in politics and to be in a very hard space of politics, right? In the war space. And I remember learning about countries, and hearing how people would talk about, and I pronounce this different, so everybody pronounces it differently, whether it's I say Niger, but everyone pronounces it a little different, or Haiti, and just looking at all the literature around the space and the way, you know, people talk about it, like, you know, it's like those countries are never going to develop, right? Those places are the worst, that there'll never be progress. And I just remember being like, that's where I want to be. I want to be in the place where people don't believe that it's going to happen, because I'm like, that's actually where all such innovation, like what can spring up from this place will be so bountiful. And so I think that's such a driver for the work that I do, is and that's my inspiration of saying, like, these places and people who we've said are forgotten, like they hold such magic and they make our worlds better. And so I want to showcase that in a way where I'm listening first and hearing first and learning, and taking that to build something in partnership. And so that's always been my philosophy. And so I look around for people who carry those similar characteristics, or who build from that kind of platform, or who also just like create innovative technologies that you thought, well, wow, I didn't know that could be created. But yeah, so that's what I can, that's what I'll say. I'm inspired by so many people who have taken that brave step also to enter entrepreneurship in the midst of so many other voices that say, you know, this isn't for you, or you can't do it, or, you know, different things like that. Just seeing how folks have walked through adversity and continue to walk through adversity as well, and share about that.
Winnie, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm gonna transition over to Jessica, because when you had mentioned the space of your time being, you know, from the London School of Business, or isn't that where you wound up getting your master's? Where did you get your master's from?
Me?
Yeah.
The London School of Economics.
London School of Economics. And so Winnie and I had talked about our travels internationally, our work internationally. And that is a piece that I'm so glad that you did share here, because there are different people on their life's journey who are creating environments that essentially, it's all about not just survival, but essential thriving in that space. But it made me think about the work that some people may not know that Jessica was doing prior to her transition over to the Latino Chamber in that space of politics as well. And so Jessica, same question for you, of who do you look to as you put your work into practice? And I should also expand, it may not be just a person. It could be anything, inanimate or not, as well, because I oftentimes draw inspiration from what's around me, which is my life source, my oxygen, my plants. So,
you know, I have so many people to thank, and to you know, in honoring that space, right? You know, it's those business owners that come into the chamber out of sheer necessity, and then who make with, you know, a lot of the businesses that come into our chambers are businesses that don't have any other option but to start a business to sustain their families, right? And so the beauty of it is, when they came, like now, because I'm going on my 5th year with the chamber, when they came like 3 years ago, and they're like, well, now I'm on business number 4, and they tell me the story, and I saw the struggle. Like, there's one guy that I always look at him, and I'm like, that's why I'm here, because of him, because you know, he's a gentleman that's working with an I-10. He's undocumented, has gone through the worst situation, but is doing great things, has reinvented himself, has now, because of how much money his company made, you know, now he qualifies for a special visa, you know, which is crazy. And now he has like 5 different contracts with Hiltons around the state. And it's that evolution and that opportunity that he, you know, I asked him once, so what motivated you to get where you're at? And he's like, his business partner originally was somebody that was a non-Latino, and he said he kept looking down at me, but that was what drove me to like want to like prove to him that I could do it, and now he came to me for a job, and so I was like, yeah, and for me, those stories, the stories of people that we've helped and that have continually persevered and done things to like just reinvent themselves. That's my inspiration. I mean, along with my mom, I'll tell you that my mom is my inspiration every day, and she keeps it real. She'll just like, girl, come back down. These are the people you're serving. I don't care if you're on that trip to DC, you got to come back, so she'll keep it real. But, there's just so many people. And, I always say, I think when we do our monthly calls, everybody, we do these monthly check-ins, Dr. Sagashus, Winnie, and Alex, and those are those are my moments of inspiration, because sometimes I'm like I'm questioning my validity as a leader, as a human being, as a woman. And then I got Dr. Sagashus like, go show up in there all authentic. And I walked in all like, like a peacock. Whoop, and I felt like I was in my element. These are all, especially when you're in a room full of, national leaders, VP of Comcast, and you're on that board. It's hard when you're like, questioning what are you doing there? And I did, and again, the motivation that I get from just a circle of women that has been so special and so intimate in the sense that, I think we've cried together, discussed like our very intimate stories about leadership and how to overcome the obstacles. And Winnie, you're always smiling and saying, you can do it, right? You can do it. You're the cheerleader. I think that for me, to be honest, if you're asking me, Alex, who motivates me, I'll say the three of you. And it's just because, yesterday I needed that. And it's a push that I think as women, we all need to like be our cheerleaders, especially it's because it's hard to be in this space, right? And we all kind of go through that. We're all going through something. And it's good to say, hey, I'm here. Let me hear you out. It's a safe space, show up, right? And so, I just want to, I just want to thank all of you for staying. Because you're in the last call, you guys gave me a couple suggestions and I took them, and they've worked towards my benefit, not my benefit, but everyone's benefit toward, in the chamber. So, it's very important to have this space right here to be able to connect with everyone.
Thanks, Jess. And I know we're at the top of the hour of 4:30, but I want Sagashus's voice and same question, but I also did just want to let the panelists or let the attendees know that I also did put it in the chat that if any of you have any questions for our panelists to please raise your hand or put it in the chat as well. I know that there's a lot that's been shared here today, but Sagashus, why don't you round us out on your response in this space of who do you look to when you're putting all the work that's being done into practice?
So I'll answer by starting with my children. My oldest son challenges me a lot, but it's in good ways. He forces me to question my beliefs, my values, in a way. Like I give you an example. When he was a little boy, I was telling him, you can't wear pink. And this was before we start having discussions we're having now. It was 17, 18 years ago. You can't wear pink. And he was like, why? And I couldn't answer him. I'm like, because boys wear blue and girls wear pink. And he was like, until you can come up with a better answer to that, Mom, I'm going to keep wearing pink. He was like 2. And he like rolled off on his big wheel. And I was like, oh, because I didn't have a good answer. And so that particular child challenges me. But when he became a certain age, he was rebelling because his dad wasn't in the house. And I had to figure out how to help him understand, because my older 2 girls had me in the house. How do I help him figure out what's a role model for him? And I had to explain to him, even though you see it as a disadvantage, you're lucky that you have a world of people. You don't have one person you can focus on. You have a world of people you can look to piece together what you want your identity to be. I think I take that approach that I offered to him. I piece together I didn't have an example of what I'm doing right now. I didn't have that example before me. So I have to piece together what this looks like. And so I look to science fiction. I look to science fiction because it's a world that most fiction is created in real possibilities. Science fiction is about the impossible, us imagining the impossible as possible. So I look to science fiction a lot. I look to what people would see as competitors. I don't see them as competitors. I see them as peers who are providing solutions. And I don't provide a solution that competes with theirs. I find one that either complements what they're doing or something that adds to the conversation that they've already created. I look to my predecessors and my ancestors, and I look to this particular circle that we're in right now, particularly Alex, Winnie, and Jessica. What I take from Jessica is the reminder to always have a story available that's relevant so that people can relate, right? Jessica brings that good storytelling to the equation. Winnie is going to always show up with the numbers. She's going to be like, and this statistic and this thing happened and numbers are. And that reminds me, just make sure you have numbers to back up what you're saying to go with the story. And Alex, who is my ultimate leadership crush, what I love about Alex, and I've been open about this, what I love about Alex is that she leads in a way that brings the humanity to the table. She leads in a way that she takes no BS, but she is very empathetic, and she leads from a place of power, even if she's not having a good day, even if she's not feeling certain. And it's not fake it till you make it. I understand that. I understand what my strengths are. I understand what I bring to the table. And so even if I got to go somewhere and just fall out and faint behind a door, cry, close the door, when I show up, I have a certain kind of responsibility is to acknowledge my own vulnerability as well as to lead and inspire. And I don't always want to show up, and I want to just fall out and faint at the podium a lot of times. But when I think about Alex, it's like, how does Alex show up? Okay, we fall and faint behind the doors with our friends, but at this podium, for these 45 minutes, I'm going to give people the best that I can offer because I may be the only example of this version of leadership that they may have. And so for me, that's where I get my leadership. And of course, the final place is the women from home. A lot of the women where I'm from may not have the education, the degrees, the businesses. They may not have the fancy jobs with the best titles, but those women know how to make things happen, and they know how to build what they have. I remember one woman who was a neighbor who I had no idea even noticed me. She and I happened to be walking in the same direction that day. She didn't crack a smile. She had the most serious, that stereotypical Black woman serious face. She had that, and she looked at me. She saw that I was pregnant. She said, make sure you teach your child that if there's ever a time that he or she is stripped of everything, they still feel like they're worth something. Like you can only get that unsolicited advice from a Black woman walking to the bus stop in the middle of the day, right? So those are my inspirations.
That last piece is #facts. Whether it was asked or not, it was proffered. And it's those moments where, for me, as well as I think for so many, you take them and you reflect on them.
Yes.
So I know we're over time. I know we still have several people who are on the line. I see a lot of people that are like, we have to go. Thank you so much. Lena, if it's okay, can we just ask for people if they have additional questions to send them? They can send them to me. They can send them to you. They can send them to Olivia, to whomever. I want to be respectful of everybody. It's the end of the day. Our time is up. Again, it's been such a great honor and a privilege to share this space with all of you, not just with my fellow panelists, but also all of you. Dr. Sagashus, Jessica, Winnie, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are all #badass women who are #crushing it. And I'm so thankful to know each of you. I know that those on the call were so appreciative, as well as honored to just listen to you share your truth and your story. and be in that space, as Winnie shared, of vulnerability, and bringing alongside us as well. You are wise, you are insightful, you're real, you are authentic, you are constantly addressing and keeping for all of us what is and should be top of mind is that the impacts racial disparities have, they're still continuing. And they continue to impact our Black, our Latinx, and our other marginalized and underrepresented communities. And so when we think about what the Global Women's Leadership Network's mission is and what their charge is and our collective charges is to provide women with the opportunity and the resources to make a measurable difference. And it was great to start the top of the hour, to hear the success and to hear the reach outs following the December session with you, Jess, with you, Winnie, and now Sagashus. As Winnie reminded us, we're all going to be following that podcast once it drops. I also am encouraging people, if you are not already following these people on LinkedIn, follow these women on LinkedIn, follow these organizations that they represent as well. Go to their social profiles. And again, it is our hope that today's discussion, share, fireside chat, whatever we're going to call this, has inspired you to learn, dive in, go deep, do more, and most importantly, be advocates and act. So stay safe, be well, enjoy your weekends once it starts, everybody. And safe travels to my fellow panelists who are traveling.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. I'm so glad, Alex. I rushed through the presentation. We still went over on time. Because I said we have to quickly say everything so we have time. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Truly, Sagashus, Winnie, and Jessica, letting us think. You touched upon a lot of things that we encounter across the board through GWLN and issues affecting women and barriers that are affecting women. GWLN is going to be putting out a report actually next month, and you did touch upon a lot of things. So thank you for making us think. Thank you for making us feel the emotions. Thank you for #leadership crush, I guess, you know, so Josh loved it, obviously. Everybody just be well, stay safe, be strong, and power on. That's all.
Thank you, Lena.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.